Okay, forget what you think you know about empires and conquests. Forget kings and massive armies for a second. What if I told you that one of the most important conquests in all of history was pulled off by a private company? It's a wild story, and today we're diving into how the English East India Company took over Bengal, one of the richest places on Earth, in less than 10 years.
And the whole thing, the real spark that lit the fuse for this corporate takeover, wasn't some grand invasion. Nope, it was a squabble over a single piece of paper, a trade permit known as a dastak.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We'll start with why Bengal was such a massive prize in the first place. Then we'll get into the trade dispute that started it all. We'll look at the infamous betrayal at Plassey, and then see what happened when the company's puppet rulers started to push back. After that, the decisive military showdown at Buxar, and finally, we'll unpack the brilliant and brutal system they created called power without responsibility that sealed Bengal's fate.
So, first things first. To really get this story, you have to understand that in the 18th century, Bengal wasn't just another province. It was the absolute economic jewel of India. It was unbelievably wealthy, super fertile, and pretty much every European power had its eyes on it.
I mean, just picture the scene. Bengal was a powerhouse. It was an agricultural giant and a massive hub for trade. For the British, it was basically a gold mine. They were exporting all these high-demand goods. We're talking beautiful cotton textiles, silk, indigo dye, and, maybe most importantly, saltpeter. A key ingredient for gunpowder. This wasn't just some casual trade. It was insanely profitable. So you've got all this wealth. How does it all go sideways? Well, it all started with one single royal decree. A trade privilege that was supposed to be a simple business perk got twisted and turned into a weapon for economic warfare.
And here it is, the infamous dastak. You see, way back in 1717, the Mughal emperor gave the East India Company a farman, basically a royal order. This order let them issue these trade passes, or dastaks, for their goods, which meant they didn't have to pay any taxes. The whole point was just to make foreign trade a little smoother for the company.
But this is where it all goes wrong. On one hand, you have the legal, intended use. It was only for the company's official trade. But then you have what actually happened. Company employees started using these passes illegally for their own private businesses, their own side hustles, to build up huge personal fortunes without paying a dime in taxes. It got so bad, they even started selling these dastaks to Indian merchants. This completely wrecked the local economy, and crucially, it meant the local ruler, the Nawab of Bengal, was losing a massive amount of tax money. And get this, for this incredible privilege, the company was paying a tiny, tiny sum, just 3,000 rupees a year, for tax-free rights on exports worth over 50,000 pounds. It was just an absurdly one-sided deal. You can totally see why the Nawabs of Bengal felt like they were getting robbed blind. All this tension was just bound to explode. And it did, at the Battle of Plassey. But as we're about to see, this was less of a real battle and more of a carefully planned conspiracy that would literally change the course of Indian history. And things escalated so fast. In April 1756, the new Nawab, a young guy named Siraj-ud-Dowlah, told the English to stop building up their forts in Calcutta. They basically said no. So by June, the Nawab had marched in and captured the city. But the English officials who fled weren't just licking their wounds, they were busy making secret deals, plotting against the Nawab with his own men. Then, by early 1757, Robert Clive shows up with an army and takes the city right back. And this is how it all went down. Robert Clive started making deals with the very heart of the Nawab's inner circle. We're talking about Mir Jafar, the Nawab's own top general, and Jagat Seth, the most powerful banker in all of Bengal. The deal was simple. Clive promised to make Mir Jafar the new Nawab if he would just betray his master on the battlefield. The victory was basically bought and paid for before a single soldier moved. This quote really just says it all. Plassey wasn't some great military achievement. It was a fixed match. When the fighting started, the biggest and most important part of the Nawab's army, the part led by the traitor Mir Jafar, just stood there. They did absolutely nothing. So after Plassey, you'd think the British were set, right? They put their man, Mir Jafar, on the throne and figured the cash would just roll in. But they found out pretty quick that even a puppet can be hard to control, especially when your demands for money just never ever stop.
So first they had Mir Jafar, but he just couldn't keep up with the company's endless demands for money. So they booted him and put his son-in-law Mir Qasim in charge. But here's the twist. Mir Qasim was actually a really smart and efficient ruler. He started trying to fix the administration, he moved his capital city to get away from the British, and he started rebuilding his army. He had no interest in being a puppet, and that, of course, made him a major threat.
This clash with Mir Qasim led to a second, and honestly a far more important battle, the Battle of Buxar. Now, unlike the fixed fight at Plassey, this was a real, full-blown military showdown, and it's the one that truly cemented British power in India. This is the key difference right here. Plassey was won with secret handshakes and bags of gold. Buxar, on the other hand, was won with superior military discipline and firepower. This was a genuine clash of armies, and it proved just how scarily effective the company's forces had become. And what makes the victory at Buxar so incredible is who the British were fighting against. This wasn't just one angry Nawab. This was a massive alliance. Mir Qasim, the Nawab of the powerful neighboring state of Awadh, and even the Mughal emperor himself, Shah Alam II. It was a huge army, and a small disciplined company force under Hector Munro defeated all of them. All right, so after this huge win at Buxar, the British don't just find a new puppet. No, they get much, much smarter. Robert Clive comes back and sets up this brilliant but completely exploitative system that gave the company all the power and all the wealth of Bengal, but with none of the actual work or responsibility. This whole thing was made official in the Treaty of Allahabad in 1765. The Mughal emperor, who was basically their prisoner at this point, granted the company the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In return, the company paid him an annual allowance. And just like that, the financial control of the entire region was handed over to a foreign company. So what exactly is this Diwani? It's simple, really. It's the right to collect all the taxes and revenue of a province. This was the ultimate prize. With the Diwani, the East India Company now held the purse strings to the immense wealth of Bengal. This led to what's known as the dual government, and it was a masterpiece of exploitation. On the one side, you have the company. They held all the real power, the Diwani, which is the money, and they controlled the army. On the other side, you had the Nawab. He was left with the Nizamat, so the responsibility for things like law and order. But he had no power and no money to actually do anything. It was the perfect system for the company. All the power, none of the responsibility. And the results? Well, they were absolutely devastating for the people of Bengal. The system led to a massive drain of wealth out of the region and back to Britain. The company didn't even have to ship silver from Britain to buy Indian goods anymore. They just used Bengal's own tax money to buy its own products. This led to widespread poverty and made the terrible famine of 1770 infinitely more deadly. So just think about that for a second. In just 8 years, a private trading company went from being simple merchants to the actual rulers of India's richest province. And that leaves us with a massive looming question. Now that the company had Bengal's enormous wealth to fund its ambitions, how would this corporation's hunger for power go on to reshape the future of the entire Indian subcontinent?